45 years ago, a young woman in Milwaukee left her night shift at the Schlitz brewery and vanished without a trace, leaving her family and the entire city in a state of unease. Police suspected a male coworker who had once been close to her was involved, but with no body or strong enough evidence, the investigation quickly hit a dead end. Yet, over the years that followed, the girl's desperate mother never gave up, still believing her daughter was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Then one day, when a young detective reopened the old case file, she uncovered a small detail that everyone had overlooked. A detail that would change the entire case and send shivers through Milwaukee. Before we dive into this chilling story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love cases that get solved after years of silence, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. December 1980, Milwaukee was gripped by freezing cold and industrial fog. The end-of-year days cloaked the city in a thick gray haze, with the scent of brewing malt mixing with the smell of machine oil and train smoke drifting from the Menomonee Valley. In the South Side industrial area, Evelyn Evie Parker, 22, had just finished her night shift at the Schlitz brewery. She was one of the youngest workers in the plant, quiet and reserved, often staying late to double-check the production line before shutting it down. That night, Evie packed up her shift log, said goodbye to a few coworkers, switching to the morning shift, then slipped on her gray sweater and wrapped a red scarf around her neck. She left through the west gate, carrying a red canvas bag with her pay stub and a few personal items. Snow was falling heavily, and the wind carried a biting chill through the old brick corridor, with sodium lights overhead casting a faint yellow glow on the narrow road. From a distance, a train whistle echoed, slow and weary. A security guard at the gate recalled her waving goodbye before crossing the snow-covered parking lot, her small figure gradually disappearing toward Canal Street, where the night bus stop was located. After that, the brewery fell silent again, with only the hum of old machinery and the wind whistling through the chimneys. That was the last time anyone saw Evelyn Parker. By morning, snow blanketed the porch. In the small apartment on Kinnickinnick Avenue, Evie's bed remained neatly made, her heavy coat still hung behind the door, and the kettle sat cold. The kitchen clock showed nearly 8, and Evie still hadn't returned. Her mother, Margaret Parker, initially thought her daughter might have stayed at a friend's place, but by noon, there were no messages or calls. She phoned the brewery, and the shift supervisor confirmed Evie had clocked out on time, and nothing seemed amiss. Margaret stepped onto the porch, snow up to her boots, and went door to door asking neighbors, then called a few of Evie's coworkers. Everyone shook their heads. The brewery's phone line rang endlessly into the cold void, unanswered. As the afternoon wore on, worry turned into a choking dread. Margaret stood by the window, staring at the now quiet street, where snow continued to fall, blanketing rooftops and utility poles, then silently returned to the table, picked up the beige rotary phone, and trembling, dialed the police. Margaret Parker's call reached the Milwaukee police switchboard in the late afternoon, with temperatures outside hovering just below zero. Her voice was hoarse and faltering, reporting that her daughter hadn't come home since the previous night. The operator logged the report, coded it as missing person, possible abduction, and forwarded to the Menomonee Valley Investigative Unit. Detective Richard Malone took the case, a middle-aged man with nearly a decade of experience in the Special Investigations Unit. He had seen all kinds of missing persons cases, but something in the mother's voice felt different. A cold, unmistakable fear that left no room for confusion or typical worry. Malone and 2 patrol officers first visited the Parker home. The small house on Kinnickinnick Avenue was bathed in the pale light of a winter afternoon. Inside, Margaret sat at the dining table, clutching a cold cup of tea, her eyes red and swollen. On the table was a photo of Evie in her brewery uniform, creased at the corner. She recounted how her daughter had worked the night shift, didn't come home, and wasn't answering her phone. The police checked Evie's room. The bed was tidy, her winter coat still hung up, and her suitcase and personal documents were untouched. There was no sign she'd left willingly. Malone jotted down every detail in his notebook and asked about Evie's usual route home from the brewery. Her mother, voice trembling, described the path along the riverbank and past the Schlitz warehouses, where trucks still moved at night. Dusk was falling, and fresh snow began to pile up. The investigators left the house and drove toward the Schlitz brewery in the Menomonee Valley industrial area, where dim yellow lights glowed from the smokestacks. The shift supervisor confirmed Evie had clocked out on time the previous night. Leaving the west gate alone, Malone requested the logbook, cross-checked the times, then walked with the officers along the old route to Canal Street, where the bus stop was. The wind blew against them, snow thick on the ground, but under the faint streetlights, Malone noticed faint footprints in the old snow, small and close together, like those of a woman. The tracks veered toward the parking lot, then vanished near a frozen puddle by the old, abandoned Schlitz warehouse. One of the patrol officers spotted a white Ford Pinto, Evie Parker's car, with the correct license plate, parked crookedly at the edge of the road. The doors were locked, the windows coated in snow. Malone wiped the glass with his glove. The driver's seat was empty, but the red canvas bag sat unopened on the passenger seat. On the floor were a few scattered coins and a store receipt, with no signs of tampering. He carefully inspected around the car. No blood, no signs of a struggle, only a half-burned Marlboro cigarette butt lying in the snow a few steps away. Malone signaled his team to cordon off the area, mark the spot, and carefully bagged the cigarette with tweezers as evidence. The area was temporarily sealed off. Police car lights swept red and blue across the snow-covered road. Malone's breath steamed in the cold air as he stared at the dark row of warehouses, their iron doors shut tight, mentally retracing the path Evie might have taken. It was a short, straight route, with no turns, yet she had vanished within a few hundred meters. No other footprints besides hers, no drag marks, no fresh tire tracks, just the wind and heavy snow, as if erasing everything that had happened. Malone documented the entire scene, ordered photographs, and collected snow samples around the car for chemical analysis. A map of the area was spread out on the hood of a patrol car, marking where the Pinto was found and the path to the bus stop. He paused for a moment, then wrote a brief note in his book. Weather obstruction, possible abduction site. As he returned to the car, Malone glanced at his watch. Nearly midnight. The brewery's distant lights had mostly gone out, leaving only the sound of the wind and the occasional clank of metal in the night. He closed his notebook and said quietly to the young officer beside him, "We're opening a formal investigation. This girl didn't just get lost." The next morning, Malone returned to the Schlitz brewery with a field clerk to conduct initial interviews. The workers' break room still carried the faint smell of malt and machine oil. Over a dozen night shift workers were called in, mostly bottling line workers and machine technicians. Malone opened his notebook and questioned each one. Most said the same thing. Evie finished her work as usual, showed no unusual behavior, and didn't mention any plans after her shift. A middle-aged woman recalled Evie receiving a small note during her shift, reading it and tucking it into her pocket, looking flustered, but no one knew what it said. Malone noted the detail, marking it with a red pen. When he questioned the gate security guard, a man named Louis Hendricks with graying hair and trembling hands holding a coffee mug, he said that on the night Evie disappeared, he saw a green pickup truck parked near the back gate, in an area rarely used by workers. "I remember it idling for a few minutes before shutting off. The driver didn't get out. I thought it was an early delivery," Hendricks said, eyes on the floor. Malone asked for more details, the truck's make, model, or company logo. Hendricks thought for a moment and said, "Maybe a Ford, an older one. I couldn't see the plate clearly because of the snow." Malone paused his pen, underlining green Ford truck, unknown plate. A young worker, Carla Mendez, timidly mentioned that before clocking out, Evie had said she was meeting someone after work. When Malone pressed for details, she shook her head, saying she only overheard it and wasn't sure if it was a boyfriend or a coworker. Another worker chimed in, saying they'd seen Evie talking to maintenance engineer Thomas Renshaw in the third-floor hallway the previous week, looking tense. She'd been avoiding him lately, the man said. Malone asked more about Renshaw and learned he was a long-time employee, quiet, reserved, and often worked nights because he liked the quiet. Malone requested a list of employees with green pickup trucks from the administrative office. After 2 hours of review, only 3 owned such vehicles, and Renshaw was the only one on the night shift during the disappearance. Malone crossed out the other 2 names and looked at Renshaw's file. Male, 31, mechanical maintenance engineer, residing in West Allis. A personnel note mentioned he'd taken 3 days of unapproved leave in November for family reasons. Malone felt the need to meet this man immediately. That afternoon, he and another officer went to the maintenance area at the back of the brewery. Renshaw was wiping oil from a wrench, a lean man with messy brown hair, his eyes darting away when he saw the police. Malone introduced himself, showed his badge and asked, "Did you leave the brewery on the night of December 16th? Renshaw nodded, his voice low. "I left early, around 10. I don't know anything about Miss Parker." Malone noted the watch on his wrist. "You're on the night shift, supposed to end at 11. Why leave early?" Renshaw shrugged. "The machines were running fine, so I checked them and left." After leaving the maintenance room, Malone requested a check of the time logs. The results showed Renshaw's keycard was swiped at the gate at 11:37 p.m., nearly an hour after his stated time. Malone reviewed the data twice to be sure, then wrote briefly in his notebook, "Inconsistent timeline, possible contact." On his way to the parking lot, he paused to look at the row of warehouses where Evie's car had been found. Snow was falling again, and the wind scattered the still wet ink on his reports. In his mind, the scene from that night was taking shape. A young woman walking through a deserted industrial area, a truck idling in the shadows, and a man lying about his departure time. The pieces didn't yet fit, but Malone knew he'd just touched the first detail that could lead to the truth. The next morning, Malone returned to the scene with the forensic team. Evie's white Ford Pinto remained in the temporary lot, covered in a thin layer of ice. They began a meticulous inspection, no signs of forced entry on the doors. The lock was intact, and no fresh scratches. The driver's seat, door handle, and steering wheel bore only Evie's fingerprints. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no stray hairs. The gear shift was in neutral, the key in the ignition, but not turned on. Malone stood nearby, noting details in his book while watching technicians collect snow samples around the tires and take close-up photos of the footprints. Everything was too neat, too quiet, as if someone had deliberately left nothing behind. While the forensics team gathered more evidence, Malone turned his attention to the Marlboro cigarette butt he'd sealed on the first night. He sent it to the police lab for chemical and blood type analysis. 2 days later, the results came back. The saliva on the filter belonged to blood type B+, relatively rare. Malone immediately requested medical records for all night shift employees at Schlitz. When the list arrived, he scanned each line, stopping at a familiar name. Thomas Renshaw, blood type B+. He said nothing, just folded the file and looked out the window where snow was melting into gray streaks on the road. Though suspicions were growing clearer, Malone couldn't secure a search warrant. The legal grounds were too weak, no witness to a crime, no signs of coercion, just a cigarette butt with a matching blood type. He met with the prosecutor's office, but they cautioned, a cigarette alone isn't enough. It could be a coincidence. Malone understood and couldn't argue. He returned to his desk, spreading out the crime scene photos. Footprints of varying depths in the snow, the car standing silently, like mute evidence. In his case log, he wrote, "No direct evidence, linking suspect. Observation required." That afternoon, Malone set up discreet surveillance on Renshaw. 2 plainclothes officers took turns watching his house from a distance in the West Allis suburbs. A small, silver-painted house with a garage in the back, filled with mechanical tools. Over 2 days, Renshaw's routine was consistent. He went to work in the morning, returned home in the evening, and occasionally stopped at a convenience store for coffee and a newspaper. No contact with others, no signs of anxiety. On the second night, with snow falling again, he turned off his lights early, while Malone sat in a car 2 blocks away, observing through binoculars. Renshaw seemed like an ordinary man, showing no signs of guilt, and that very normalcy made Malone increasingly uneasy. The next morning, the surveillance report was finalized. Its conclusion was cold and concise. No suspicious activity observed. Malone read it, scratched out a few redundant notes, then added a new line in bold handwriting. Suspicion remains, insufficient evidence. He closed the notebook, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the dim light filtering through the frost-covered window. On his desk, Evie Parker's sealed evidence envelope remained, a reminder of a truth still out of reach. 3 days after the fruitless surveillance ended, Malone returned to the route Evie might have taken. Milwaukee's sky was still heavy, with melting snow forming a slippery mix of gray mud and ice. He stood by the Menomonee River, where murky water flowed slowly between drifting ice chunks, staring at the dark, cold surface. In his initial report, the wind direction and footprints had led him to suspect she might have been pushed or slipped into the river. But so far, no evidence supported that theory. Malone called for support from the Milwaukee Fire Department's dive rescue team. 2 days later, 5 professional divers arrived with sweep nets and basic sonar equipment, working in near-zero visibility underwater. From early morning, the hum of engines echoed by the bridge as small boats moved along both banks. Malone stood on the bridge's edge, watching each dive, his eyes tracking the flashlights flickering in the dark water. Bitter wind mixed with snow and rain rippled the river's surface. They searched for 3 days, pulling up only a few pieces of wood, an old tire, and some plastic bags. No trace of Evie, no belongings of hers. On the 4th day, the dive team halted the search. Malone signed the closure report, adding a note, "No recovery. Visibility poor, strong current." He lingered by the river, a nagging sense of failure rising within him. Everything remained as it was. A girl vanished in a mere few hundred meters, with no witnesses, no new evidence. Undeterred, Malone expanded the investigation to the Schlitz warehouses near the brewery, where Evie's car had been found. The area housed dozens of old buildings, most shuttered or under repair. Malone and the technical team went to inspect, but at the eastern warehouse, they were stopped by a sign. Restricted area, renovation in progress. The site manager explained the area was undergoing foundation reinforcement and entry was unsafe. Malone showed his badge, but the manager stood firm. "You need a company or court order to get in." Malone knew he couldn't override that. Instead, he circled the perimeter, observing through the iron fence. Some windows were broken, the interior pitch black, with only the wind whistling through gaps. In the snow-mixed mud, he saw old frozen tire tracks, their age impossible to determine. An officer in his team whispered, "This place is big enough to hide a whole car." Malone nodded slightly, the thought already flickering in his mind. He photographed the warehouse area, marked the map, and returned to the station. That evening, Malone sat alone in his office. Black and white photos were scattered across his desk, the murky river, footprints fading in the snow, the old warehouse silent in the dark. He reviewed every report, searching for contradictions or overlooked details. But everything was seamless, no gaps. The forensic report confirmed no hair samples, no unfamiliar fingerprints, no blood, no suspicious fibers. The case was slipping from his grasp, like the melting snow outside, erasing all traces. The next morning, Malone presented a case summary to the chief of investigation. His voice was hoarse and brief. No new leads, no witnesses, no additional evidence, no clear signs of a crime. His superior nodded, instructing him to finalize the report. Before leaving the room, Malone paused for a few seconds at the caseboard, staring at Evelyn Parker's name written in black ink. He picked up his pen and added a short note to the report. All leads exhausted. When he looked up, snow was falling again outside, light and silent, blanketing a city slowly forgetting the young woman who vanished that winter. In the spring of 1981, As snow melted on Milwaukee's old rooftops and ice on the Menomonee River began to break, Evelyn Parker's disappearance remained unsolved. Over the 3 months since she vanished, dozens of minor reports came and went, closed without progress. Malone, still doggedly pursuing the case, spent much of his time in the archives, rereading reports he knew by heart. He searched for a crack, a discrepancy, but everything led to a dead-end loop. No body, no witnesses, no motive. It was as if everything had been buried under the thick snow of the past winter, along with the Parker family's fading hopes. In mid-March, an internal meeting reviewed unresolved missing persons cases. The small meeting room, with dark wooden walls and dusty windows, was dimly lit. The chief of investigations read through the cases in a monotone. When Evelyn Parker's name came up, he paused briefly before saying, "No evidence of a crime, classify as cold case." Malone, seated at the back, said nothing. He understood that in this system, the label meant the case would be sidelined. He closed his notebook, hearing the pen tap rhythmically on the table, like an invisible full stop. The next day, the Parker case was officially coded #400-1880. An archivist carried the evidence box to the basement, where unsolved cases were stored on endless iron shelves. Malone followed, watching as the box was labeled, E. Parker, missing person. December 1980. Inside were an envelope with crime scene photos, a sealed Marlboro cigarette butt, a few handwritten notes, and his small notebook. When the archive door closed, the metallic clang echoed in the cold, damp space. In the weeks that followed, Malone was reassigned to the Financial Crimes Unit. He didn't protest, only cleared his desk, slipping a photocopied set of the Parker case file, yellowed pages into his bag. On his last afternoon in the old office, he sat alone, rereading his notes about the snowy night, the abandoned car, the man with evasive eyes. The more he read, the more he felt he'd missed something, a small piece hidden among the lines. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find it. By late spring, Margaret Parker visited the police station for an update. Malone met her in the public reception room. Her face was gaunt and pale, her eyes red. She asked, "Have you found anything?" Malone shook his head. He said nothing more, knowing any comfort would be hollow. As she left, he watched her through the fogged glass door until her figure disappeared into the sunlit courtyard. That summer, Milwaukee resumed its familiar rhythm. Those who knew Evie mentioned her name less and less, then stopped. On Malone's desk, case #400-1880 was replaced by bank fraud cases, cold numbers, and charts. Sometimes, late at night, he'd open his drawer, pull out the Parker file copy, and study the old photos. Faint footprints in snow, a frozen river, a white Ford Pinto coated in thin ice. He wasn't sure why he kept them, only that each time he looked, the same emptiness returned. By year's end, when the archive system updated its catalog, Evelyn Parker's name was officially listed under unresolved, cold case. On paper, it was routine, but to Malone, it felt like admitting defeat. He wrote a final note in his personal notebook. Case #400-1880, closed pending new evidence. He closed it carefully, placed it in a private drawer. Outside, winter winds rose again, carrying a chill from Lake Michigan. Somewhere in the city, Evie Parker's name faded from memory, lingering only in a few yellowed pages and the mind of a detective who never truly believed the case was over. Nearly 30 years later, Milwaukee had transformed. The large breweries along the Menomonee Valley were now just rusted smokestacks, and the old warehouses were sealed or sold to small companies. The winter of 2008 arrived late, with light snow dusting the roofs of abandoned factories. In the new Milwaukee Police Department building on West State Street, a special unit had just been formed, the Cold Case Unit, dedicated to reviewing unsolved missing persons and homicide cases. With modern facilities, and crucially, the Wisconsin State Crime Lab's ability to analyze DNA from tiny samples, something impossible in the 1980s. Detective Jamie Torres, 36, was one of the first assigned to the unit. A former violent crimes investigator, she was meticulous, quiet, and accustomed to working in silence. On her new desk, stacks of dusty case files arrived from the Central Archive, cases forgotten across generations of police. Tories opened each one, prioritizing those with biological or physical evidence untested by modern methods. Among them, one old file stood out. Evelyn Parker, missing person, December 1980. The corner bore a faded code, #400-1880. Tories opened the evidence box. Inside, everything remained sealed in brown paper bags with old verification signatures, a Marlboro cigarette butt, a few black and white crime scene photos, and a set of handwritten notes by Detective Richard Malone. The green ink had faded, but the writing was clear. Evie Parker, 22, missing after night shift. Possible foul play. Tories read and reread the brief scene description. An abandoned car. No signs of a struggle, no blood, just the lone cigarette butt. She felt the case wasn't truly closed, just paused. Tories immediately requested DNA testing on the cigarette butt at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. She knew the process could take weeks, but a DNA profile, if still viable, would be undeniable evidence. Before leaving the office, she typed a note in the electronic log, potential DNA profile, pending analysis. Over the next few days, Tories retraced Malone's steps from nearly 30 years earlier, tracking down people from the original reports. She called Louis Hendricks, the former Schlitz brewery security guard, to arrange a meeting. They met at a small coffee shop near the nursing home where he lived. The elderly man, frail with trembling hands as he poured coffee, had a strikingly clear memory of that snowy night. He recounted slowly that he saw a light green pickup truck parked by the back gate, its engine idling softly with headlights off. I remember, the snow was heavy. The truck was in a spot workers rarely used, around 11. I didn't see anyone get in or out, but by morning it was gone, he said, staring out the window. Tories asked if he was sure it belonged to an employee. He replied instantly, I worked there 20 years, I knew everyone's vehicles. That was Renshaw's. The statement made Tories raise an eyebrow. She opened her notebook, recorded his exact words, and asked for more details. Paint color, make, truck bed features. Hendricks described a Ford F-100, noting chipped paint on the left door, matching the vehicle registration she'd just checked. The next day, Tories drove to Racine to meet Carla Mendez, a bottling worker who had shared Evie's shift. Now in her 50s, Carla lived with her family in a quiet neighborhood. When Torres explained her visit, Carla hesitated, then agreed to talk. She poured tea, staring into the distance. Evie was a good person, so kind. But toward the end of that year, she seemed worried. She once told me she wanted to end things with Tom, Renshaw. She said he'd changed, was following her, showing up at work, even when he wasn't on shift. She said, I'll make it clear to him after this shift. Torres paused, jotting down every word. Malone's notes hadn't mentioned a personal relationship between them. She realized the old case might have missed a critical motive. Torres left Carla's as the afternoon faded. Light snow dusted her car's hood, the wind biting through her sleeves. She stopped by the roadside, opened her notebook, and under Renshaw, Thomas wrote in red ink. Personal connection confirmed, possible motive, rejected relationship. 2 days later, she located another witness, Frank Donovan, a delivery driver at the brewery in 1980, now working for a transport company in Kenosha. Frank met her in a small office, lined with route maps. When Evie Parker's name came up, he grew pensive. That case, I remember it well. I was delivering that morning. Around midnight, I passed the warehouse area. I saw a green truck leaving the gate. The driver had his head down, wearing a cap, but I think it was Renshaw. I knew him. He often stayed late, said it was to check machines. Torres pressed, Are you sure it was that night? Frank nodded firmly. Yes, I logged it in my delivery book. The snow was heavy, so I remember clearly. It was the night before the Christmas break. 3 statements, 3 different people, all converging on one time, one man, one truck, and one specific area near the Schlitz brewery. Back at the cold case office, Torres arranged the pieces on a corkboard. Evie's photo, a copy of the Ford F-100 registration, and 3 red-marked witness statements. She pinned them to a timeline from 10 p.m. to 12:30 a.m., the window when Evie was last seen, and the truck left the area. The lines connecting the points formed a thin thread, but to her, it was enough to map the case's trajectory. Torres printed a summary and presented it to her supervisor. She explained concisely, consistent witness statements, specific descriptions, clearly pointing to Thomas Renshaw as the suspect. When she mentioned Renshaw's personal connection to the victim, the cold case unit chief nodded. Time to check on him again. He signed off on civilian surveillance without a search warrant, provided the suspect's identity remained confidential until legal evidence was secured. That evening, as the office emptied, Torres sat alone at her computer, pulling up Renshaw's updated records. The system showed his address, West Allis, Wisconsin. Occupation: owner of a small auto repair shop, Renshaw Automotive. She studied his driver's license photo, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, direct eyes, and a face weathered by time. Torres felt an odd sensation, part professional instinct, part the weight of something long overlooked. She saved the file, printed a copy, placed it on her desk, and wrote a final line in her daily log. Subject located, surveillance request submitted, case #41880 active. On the morning of March 3, 2008, as Torres entered the cold case unit office, she found a large envelope on her desk, stamped with the Wisconsin State Crime Lab seal. The label read, DNA report, case #41880, in bold, neat print. She stood still for a moment, feeling her heartbeat slow. Outside, it was still cold, snow clinging to her shoes, but a burning intuition surged within her, the kind that signals a case nearing its truth. Torres sat down, opened the envelope, and spread out the 30-plus page report, filled with molecular markers and matching codes. On the first page, the conclusion was clear. DNA profile obtained from cigarette butt matches sample collected from Thomas Renshaw, male, DOB 1949, with probability of 99.99%. She read it 3 times to ensure no mistake. The DNA sample, extracted from the Marlboro cigarette butt, collected in December 1980, had sat sealed in a paper bag for 28 years. That it remained intact enough for analysis was rare, but now it matched perfectly with a living person's biological sample. According to West Allis hospital records, Thomas Renshaw had been admitted in 1997 for a hand injury, and his blood sample was stored in the state's medical database. The national database had automatically cross-referenced when the lab entered Torres's test results. Torres sat quietly for a long time, staring at the bolded match confirmed on the page, feeling the fragments of the old case coming together. From a cigarette butt dropped in the snow, she now had the first physical evidence directly linking the suspect to the scene. She verified the chain of custody, meticulously documented by Malone in 1980, and stored continuously without breach. Every procedure was valid. An hour later, Torres walked into her supervisor's office. She placed the thick file on the desk, opened to the conclusion page, and pointed to the DNA match. "We have a name," she said simply. The unit chief skimmed a few lines, then looked up. "You're sure?" "Absolutely. The state lab confirmed it, and I've verified the entire chain of custody." He said nothing more, nodded, and motioned for her to prepare an official report for the Milwaukee County prosecutor. That afternoon, Torres drafted the case summary, attaching copies of the DNA results and recent witness statements. The report, nearly 40 pages long, had its conclusion marked in red ink. Evidence #4B establishes a physical connection between suspect Thomas Renshaw and crime scene. Probability of random match, 1 in 10 billion. As she uploaded the digital file to the district prosecutor's system, she exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and weight. The evidence was solid, but the chilling sensation of touching a secret buried for nearly 30 years kept her from feeling at ease. That evening, the Milwaukee County prosecutor's office received the report. The chief investigator, Mr. Halpern, carefully read the conclusion before signing an emergency arrest warrant. "We have DNA, witnesses, and corroborating statements," he told his assistant. "This isn't suspicion anymore, it's presence." A call was made to Milwaukee PD headquarters. Detective Torres was instructed to prepare additional documentation and coordinate with the arrest team. The next day at 8 a.m., she was in the second-floor meeting room with 2 tactical officers and a prosecutor's representative. They reviewed Renshaw's file. 54 years old, owner of a small garage in West Allis, no criminal record, lived alone, registered owner of a pickup truck and a hunting rifle. His driver's license photo showed a man with a sparse beard, sharp eyes, and an unremarkable appearance that could easily be overlooked. As the meeting concluded, the prosecutor signed a green sheet warrant for arrest, Thomas Renshaw. The red Milwaukee County seal stamped the bottom, like a period marking the end of nearly 3 decades of waiting. Torres left the meeting room, clutching the thick file to her chest. In her mind, she saw the snowy road Malone had described in his old notes, the place where a young woman vanished, and a forgotten cigarette butt waited nearly 30 years to speak. Pausing in the long hallway of the police station, morning light streamed through a window, illuminating the file's newly added label. Evidence confirmed. Arrest authorized. On the morning of March 12, 2008, Milwaukee's sky was overcast, with patches of snow lingering on the curbs. At 6:15 a.m., a convoy of Milwaukee police vehicles left downtown, heading west. The mission was clear: arrest Thomas Renshaw at his West Allis garage, about 20 minutes from Milwaukee. Torres sat in the lead car beside Tactical Officer Hollander, who led the entry team. She opened the file one last time, reviewing the signed arrest warrant and DNA report. Cold wind slipped through the car window, carrying the scent of exhaust and damp morning air. The silence was so thick she could hear the ticking of her wristwatch. Renshaw's garage sat on a quiet street corner, its faded white sign reading Renshaw Automotive with half the letters peeled off. As the convoy stopped, a faint yellow light glowed through the roll-up door. The tactical team fanned out. One officer banging 3 times and shouting, "Milwaukee Police, Mr. Renshaw, please open the door." No response. 3 seconds later, the screech of metal sounded as the door slowly rose, revealing Thomas Renshaw at the threshold. He wore a gray oil-stained jacket, his hands smeared with grease, his face older than in his file photo. He looked at the officers, his expression calm yet icy. "I knew this would come back," he said softly, his voice rough. Hollander read the arrest warrant and cuffed him without resistance. Torres stood back, observing every small movement, trying to read something in his detached demeanor. As officers led Renshaw to the car, she stepped inside the garage. The air was thick with the smell of metal and oil, the walls lined with neatly arranged tools, hammers, wrenches, drills. On a workbench lay a stack of rolled-up papers, old architectural blueprints. Torres unrolled one, a schematic of the Schlitz warehouse, mostly marking the eastern section. In the corner, in ink, was written, "Foundation Repair, 1980, West Section." Her pulse quickened. The police conducted a thorough search. In a metal cabinet corner, they found 3 unused cement bags, thick with dust, labeled Schlitz Construction Supply, December 1980. An officer opened a trash can by the desk, revealing rusted metal scraps, drill bits, saw blades, and bits of old leather gloves. Torres carefully photographed and sealed the items as evidence. No blood, no direct proof, but each item felt like a piece of the past resurfacing. Renshaw was brought to Milwaukee PD headquarters by 9 a.m. When Torres entered the interrogation room, he was already seated, hands cuffed, staring at the two-way mirror. On the table sat a steaming coffee mug and her thick file. Torres sat across from him, opened the file, and said calmly, "Mr. Renshaw, you know why we're here." He didn't respond. She slid the first page toward him, a copy of the DNA report, the conclusion bolded, match 99.99%. He glanced at it, sat still, then gave a faint smile. Almost 30 years, And you found me because of a cigarette butt, she replied. Not just a cigarette, but proof you were there the night she disappeared. After hours of silence, Torres returned to Renshaw, placing a glass of water and blank paper in front of him. Tell me about that night, as you remember it, she said, her voice steady but firm. Renshaw stared at the glass, then began slowly. His voice was hoarse and tired, each sentence halting, as if dredged from a deeply buried memory. She came to me that night, said she wanted to talk. I was in the warehouse, checking old pumps. It was cold, snowing hard, and I was the only one on duty. She walked up, no coat. I asked why she was out so late. She said she wanted to end it, didn't want me following her anymore. We argued. She got mad, pushed me. I pushed back. He paused, taking a deep breath, his trembling hands gripping the table's edge. She lost her balance, fell, and hit her head on the steel table's edge. That sound, I can still hear it. Torres wrote silently, her eyes fixed on him. What happened next? He swallowed hard, speaking softly. She didn't get up. I called her name, shook her, but blood was pooling. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. It was just me there. No one knew she'd come. Renshaw bowed his head, his voice catching. I was scared they'd think I killed her. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to hide it, so no one would know. He recounted that, after checking her breathing and realizing Evie was dead, he sat in the warehouse for nearly an hour, staring into space. Outside, wind howled through the iron windows, and snow fell so thickly it covered the footprints on the cement. Below the floor was a small crawl space used for water pipes. Renshaw decided to hide her there. I wrapped her in a red tarp from the storage, dragged her to the crawl space. She was light, like she was sleeping. His voice broke. I sealed it, mixed cement, and poured it over. All I thought was, if I didn't see it, it'd be gone. Torres listened, writing every word. She asked, "Did you do this alone?" "Yes, I was the only one on duty. They'd assigned me to fix the pipes. I had the key to the supply room. No one checked." "How long did it take?" "About 2 hours. I cleaned the blood, erased the traces. Before dawn, I went home, threw my clothes in the river." He sighed, his voice like smoke. The next morning, I checked again. It had set. No one noticed. Torres slid the blank paper toward him. "Can you draw the exact location you described?" Renshaw nodded. His trembling hand sketched slowly. "The warehouse's west door, the access to the technical crawl space, and a small square in the left corner, marked with an X and labeled under East Section, near Pipe Main." When finished, he set the pen down, signed, and dated it. Torres carefully placed the paper in an evidence bag, sealing it on the spot. "Do you remember anything else? Did anyone see you there?" "No one. They thought I'd left earlier. I altered the shift log, backdated my clock out." Torres asked evenly, "Why are you talking now?" Renshaw was silent for a long moment. "Because she shouldn't have to stay down there forever," he whispered, staring at the empty table. Torres closed her notebook and left the room, leaving him in silence. In the hallway, she called the cold case unit chief, relaying the confession in detail. The chief ordered immediate verification of the map and an emergency excavation warrant. Simultaneously, the prosecutor's office was notified to prepare legal proceedings. Within 2 hours, the warrant was approved. When Torres returned, Renshaw was still seated, staring into space. "We're going to the place you described," she said, her voice low but resolute. He nodded faintly, his shoulders trembling slightly. "You'll see, I'm not lying. She's still there." That afternoon, Torres held an urgent meeting with the forensic and technical teams. Renshaw's map was enlarged and spread on the table. The marked area was in the old Schlitz warehouse, now sealed. She requested concrete cutting drills, infrared scanners, and protective gear. Outside, the snow had stopped, and a heavy gray sky hung over the old rooftops. As the convoy prepared to depart, Torres held the map, staring at the small black ink X on the paper. She said nothing, folded it, and tucked it into her coat pocket. In her mind, a faint sound echoed, like cracking dry cement, the sound of a truth about to resurface. after nearly 30 years of burial. On the afternoon of March 14, 2008, the Milwaukee police convoy entered the old industrial area in the Menomonee Valley, where the Schlitz warehouse had stood abandoned for decades. The air was heavy and silent, broken only by the wind sweeping through broken windows and the sharp smell of rusted metal. Inside, dim light from portable halogen lamps illuminated moss-covered concrete pillars. The forensic team set up equipment, cordoning off the area per Renshaw's map. The X aligned with an old floor section near the eastern wall, once a technical area for water pipes. Torres stood beside the lead forensic engineer as they marked the drilling perimeter. The concrete here was unusually thick, with visible cracks along the seams. "We'll start in the center of this area," the engineer said, his voice rough from dust. The drill's piercing noise echoed through the empty space, concrete chunks crumbling and mixing with white dust. Each impact on the floor made Torres clench her fists, her eyes fixed on the widening patch. She knew the answer had waited under that cement for nearly 30 years. After nearly an hour, the drill hit something different, a dull, hollow sound. A technician signaled to stop. They knelt, using small shovels to clear the remaining debris. A musty smell rose from the crack, a mix of damp earth and metal. The scene supervisor leaned in, shining a flashlight, his voice hoarse. "Something's down there." Everyone stepped back. Two technicians cleared more concrete until a dark red fabric appeared, embedded in the broken cement and sand. One end of the fabric was exposed, clinging to the concrete. They used a thin knife to cut around the edges, slowly lifting it. The light reflected off what lay beneath, the shape of a human body, tightly wrapped in the faded tarp, with bits of old rotted rope visible. No one spoke, only the soft clicks of the forensic team's camera broke the silence, steady and rhythmic. Torres stepped forward, stopping a few feet from the excavation pit. Her chest tightened as she saw the red tarp, nearly blended with the earth. Inside, a small canvas bag fell out, its stitching frayed, a darker red, the same type Evie Parker carried the night she vanished. Torres picked it up with gloved hands, noting the faded logo on the edge. She didn't need confirmation to know it was Evie's. The forensic team worked silently, expanding the area and documenting the scene. When the last concrete layer was removed, a skeleton emerged, lying on its side, hands tied, crossed in front. The rope was decayed, but retained its looped shape around the wrists. A technician said softly, "It's fairly intact. The dry environment preserved the bones well." Torres nodded, her eyes fixed on the emerging skeleton. After full photography and measurements, the forensics team transferred the remains into a special preservation bag. In the white lamplight, the jawbone was slightly open, revealing 3 silver fillings, matching the dental records from 1980. On the right hand, a silver ring clung to the ring finger bone, engraved with 2 small letters, EP. Torres stared for a long moment, then wrote briefly in her field notebook, "Ring recovered, initials match victim." The lead forensic officer approached, speaking quietly, "We'll take the remains to the state lab for detailed analysis. It'll take a few days." Torres nodded. She signed the confirmation report and stepped back, letting the team finish cleanup. As everyone left the warehouse, Torres lingered by the empty pit. Wind from the broken windows carried dust and cold air. She looked at the bare earth where the concrete had been removed, now a dark void. Nearly 30 years ago, Malone had stood somewhere nearby, staring at the snow-covered ground, searching for a trace, never getting the chance to dig deeper. Now that void had been opened, and the long silence finally broken. Torres closed her notebook and walked out. The iron door clanged heavily as it shut, the sound echoing through the empty building. In her field report written shortly after, the conclusion was 8 words, concise, needing no further note. Human remains recovered, identification pending forensic confirmation. The remains were transported that night to the Wisconsin State Forensic Lab, where the truth awaited its name. 3 days after the excavation, Torres was at the Wisconsin State Forensic Lab, a standalone building on the north side of Madison. The morning was foggy, with a faint smell of chemicals and disinfectant in the hallway. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Howard Latham, with over 20 years of experience in cold case autopsies, met her in the cold lab, where Evie Parker's remains lay on a metal table, labeled F-2841. "Preliminary or detailed findings?" he asked, his voice rough, eyes on the data board. "Everything," Torres replied. Latham opened the thick file, flipping to the first pages. Female victim, approximately 20 to 23 years old, consistent with Evelyn Parker's data. The skeleton is largely intact, with significant damage to the skull. He pointed to a close-up photo. A diagonal crack ran from the forehead to the temple, clean and deep, indicating impact from a heavy, blunt object. Cause of death: traumatic brain injury, from a hard object, instantaneous. No defensive wounds, no small fractures in the forearms, suggesting the victim didn't have time to react. Torres leaned in, the white light reflecting off the steel table. "Can you identify the type of object?" Latham nodded. "Based on the indentation and width, likely a table edge or flat metal tool, not a hammer or pointed object." He turned to the next section. "The rope around the wrists is industrial hemp fiber, common in the 1980s. No post-mortem cuts, so it was likely tied when the victim was unconscious or just deceased." On a nearby table, evidence was separated. The red tarp, the canvas bag, the silver ring with EP, and concrete fragments from the crawl space. Torres looked at them, a lump rising in her throat. Everything matched Malone's old descriptions, except now they could speak. The final section was the chemical analysis. A technician brought a tray of labeled vials. Concrete residue. Site Renshaw Garage. Latham held 2 comparison sheets, speaking clearly. Spectroscopic analysis shows the concrete from the crawl space and Renshaw's garage matches exactly in chemical composition: calcium silicate, magnesium oxide, and color additives. This was a custom mix for Schlitz in 1980. No random coincidence. Torres nodded, jotting quickly. "What about the paint?" Paint flecks on the ribs match the machinery maintenance paint from the suspect's garage, the same type used for press equipment. Everything aligns. He closed the file, adding, "No signs of prolonged handling or body relocation. The victim died on site and was concealed almost immediately. Decomposition patterns align with December 1980. So, if he says she fell during an argument, that part could be true, but everything afterward was clearly calculated to conceal." Torres stood silently, eyes fixed on the photo of the full skeleton. Latham looked at her, his voice softer. "You know, cases like this rarely align this perfectly. Everything points to the same thing. He did it, and he knew what he was doing." He signed the final page, stamped it, and handed her the file. "This is the official report. It's no longer a missing persons case." On the drive back to Milwaukee, Torres sat silently behind the wheel, the case file resting on the passenger seat. Each line in the report was like a layer of concrete being chipped away, revealing the truth beneath. The fall was not accidental. The ropes were not for protection, and the cement wasn't poured in panic, but was the calculated act of someone who knew exactly what they were erasing. That afternoon, Torres presented the forensic report to the cold case unit chief. In the small meeting room, no one spoke for a few minutes. Torres read the conclusion concisely. "The medical examiner confirms the cause of death as traumatic brain injury, instantaneous. Concrete and machinery paint samples from the scene match those collected from suspect Thomas Renshaw's garage. Conclusion: the concealment of the body was deliberate, not a spontaneous reaction." The chief nodded slowly. "We have everything we need," he said. Torres signed the confirmation, gathered the evidence copies, and stepped out of the room. She paused by the window, looking out at the city sinking into the gloomy March evening. The old snow had melted, but the streets were still streaked with puddles, reflecting lights like unhealed cracks. In her mind, a note surfaced, as if Malone were writing alongside her on the same page. Evidence complete. Intent confirmed. That night, in the empty cold case office, with only the desk lamp illuminating case file #41880, Torres opened the first page and wrote a final line for the forensic summary. Forensic confirmation received. Classify as homicide. Prepare charge documentation. She set the pen down, closed the file, knowing that from here, Evelyn Parker's case had finally been given its true name. 2 weeks after the forensic report was submitted, the Evelyn Parker case file was sent to the Milwaukee County Prosecutor's Office for prosecution preparation. That morning, the county building was cloaked in thin fog, with cold Lake Michigan winds cutting through the old stone steps. In a third-floor meeting room, 3 people sat around a long table. Chief Prosecutor Harold Kinney, Detective Jamie Torres, and the police department's forensic consultant. Before them was a 10-inch thick stack of documents, organized into clear sections: witness statements, forensic reports, the warehouse map, and a copy of Thomas Renshaw's confession. Each page was labeled with colored tabs, arranged chronologically from December 1980 to the March 2008 excavation. Kinney opened the meeting with a low, steady voice. First, we need to ensure legal integrity. Any case spanning nearly 3 decades could face defense challenges on evidence preservation procedures. Torres nodded, pulling her notes from the file. She explained clearly how the chain of custody had been maintained since Malone's time. The cigarette butt was sealed in 1980, stored in controlled conditions, with signatures from the lead detective and archive staff. In 2008, I unsealed it under forensic supervision. Every step has documentation and photographic proof. No procedural violations. Kinney flipped through the pages, nodding in approval. The next step was confirming independent forensic results. Per protocol, reopened cold case investigations required at least 2 labs to verify DNA to avoid errors. Kinney had requested the Wisconsin State Crime Lab send a comparison sample to an independent lab in Minneapolis. A week later, the results returned. DNA sample 4B matches Thomas Renshaw. Confidence level 99.99%. Both reports were identical. No room for doubt. Torres presented the warehouse map, the paper Renshaw had drawn during interrogation. Its rough lines marked the X that perfectly matched the location where the body was found. She said softly, "We have the map drawn by the suspect himself, his signed confirmation, and the exact location of the remains." Kinney nodded, signaling the legal clerk to note it. He knew the confession leading to the body's discovery was circumstantial, but carried significant weight, validating the truth of the admission. Once all documents were reviewed, Kinney read the file's conclusion himself. Victim, Evelyn Parker, died from traumatic brain injury by a blunt object, instantaneous death. Suspect Thomas Renshaw, 54. Occupation auto garage owner, with DNA evidence confirming presence at the 1980 crime scene, matching physical evidence from his residence, and a confession admitting to concealing the body with a map leading to the remains. Charges: second-degree murder and concealment of a corpse. He paused, then added, "We need to ensure the indictment is airtight, leaving no gaps for statute of limitations or procedural challenges." Torres stayed late at the office to finalize the investigation annex. She cross-checked every recording, verifying timelines and statements from witnesses Hendricks, Mendez, and Donovan, all aligned with the original case timeline. At the end of each section, she added a red ink note, cross-verified witness statement, timeline consistent. Each small mark was a step toward turning fragments of the past into legally valid evidence. The next day, Kinney personally submitted the Parker case file to the Milwaukee County Court. He signed the cover page, the blue seal stamped boldly, reading, "Filed under Wisconsin Penal Code Section 940-02, second-degree intentional homicide, Section 940-11, hiding or burying a corpse." Shortly after, the court issued a formal notice. The Parker-Renshaw case was registered for prosecution, with a preliminary hearing to be scheduled after the prosecution completed evidence procedures. That afternoon, Torres stepped out of the building with Kinney. They paused on the stone steps, watching traffic pass below. She said quietly, "We've reached the point Malone never could." Kinney replied, "And you've brought her back to the living record. The rest is up to the court." They stood silently as the cold wind blew, carrying the metallic sounds of a nearby construction site. Late that night, in the cold case office, Torres opened her computer and updated the final investigation status. Case hash 400-1880, status charged. Offense second-degree murder and concealment of a corpse. Evidence verified. She stared at the blinking text, feeling both relief and weight. Outside, Milwaukee's lights glowed, reflecting on the calm Menomonee River, where the disappearance began nearly 30 years ago. Now, everything was in its place. Evidence, names, and charges. In the quiet night, only the soft tapping of her keyboard remained, like the steady breath of justice, slowly reviving. By late August 2008, after months of evidence review and verification, the Milwaukee County Prosecutor's Office officially began prosecution preparations. The fifth floor of the county building buzzed with rare activity. Assistant prosecutors, legal clerks, and cold case investigators worked around the clock to finalize the indictment. On Chief Prosecutor Harold Kinney's desk was a thick file bound with red cord, its cover boldly printed, State of Wisconsin versus Thomas Renshaw, case hash 400-1880. Every detail, from DNA results to the map Renshaw drew in interrogation, was chronologically arranged, proving a logical connection between the confession, physical evidence, and forensic findings. Kinney directed the team to draft a clear indictment, avoiding emotional elements. The document was structured in 4 parts: 1 case summary, 2 legal evidence, 3 motive and concealment, 4 prosecution conclusion. In the summary, he wrote, "Suspect Thomas Renshaw, in December 1980, caused the death of Evelyn Parker in the Schlitz warehouse and deliberately concealed the body to prevent authorities from discovering the crime. Physical evidence, DNA results, and direct confession confirm the criminal act." Concurrently, Torres's cold case team reviewed the entire file to ensure legal validity. She and 2 young investigators stayed late in the office, checking every signature, forensic report, and crime scene photo. A single error in preservation or a gap in documentation could allow the defense to counter in court. Torres understood this, her caution bordering on obsession. On her desk, Malone's 1981 notes sat beside the latest digital files, 2 generations of investigators separated by nearly 30 years, completing the same case together. By late September, the witness list was finalized. 3 former Schlitz brewery workers, Dr. Latham, the forensic examiner, and the Wisconsin State Crime Lab's DNA specialist. Torres was also called as the primary investigative witness, linking the entire chain of events from reopening the file to securing the confession. The prosecutor's office held closed rehearsals to ensure all testimonies adhered strictly to the file, avoiding speculation. Meanwhile, the press caught wind of the case. A Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reporter received a leak about a 28-year-old missing persons case reopened. On October 2nd, the paper ran a front-page headline, "Milwaukee Cold Case Reopened. After 28 years, new DNA evidence links former employee to 1980 disappearance." The article quoted an anonymous police source. "This may be the most thoroughly resolved cold case in the city's history." News spread quickly, with local TV stations interviewing outside Milwaukee PD headquarters. Reporters camped at the gates, snapping photos of Torres as she left the building, but she kept her head down, offering no comment. Inside, work continued at a relentless pace. Kinney and the legal team reviewed every possible defense argument, from statute of limitations to claims of accidental death. Each was countered with specific evidence: the wound's location, the type of rope, and the timing of the concrete pour. In a closed meeting, Kinney said bluntly, "We can't let them turn this into an accident. He hid the body, he lied, and we have evidence for every step." As the investigator, Torres was tasked with writing a detailed report for the prosecution, both administrative and testimonial. She wrote late into the night, the desk lamp illuminating her pages, the smell of strong coffee lingering in the empty room. Each line was the culmination of months spent scouring files, interviewing witnesses, and confronting a city's indifference to a young woman's disappearance. By late November, all documents were compiled into 4 volumes and submitted to the county court to set a trial date. The court announced the preliminary hearing for January 2009 in courtroom number 3, one of the oldest, with dark wood walls and antique glass windows. When the news broke, the media published it with bold headlines: "Trial set for Milwaukee cold case, justice for Evelyn Parker may finally come." Torres read the article in a small coffee shop near the station during a cold winter morning. She folded the paper, silent for a long moment. Outside, snow fell quietly on the old street, just as it had in Malone's case notes. Nearly 30 years later, everything was circling back to its starting point. Except this time, justice would be present in the courtroom, no longer buried under the concrete of that 1980 winter. On January 12, 2009, courtroom number 3 at the Milwaukee County Courthouse was packed. Reporters, TV crews, and faces tied to the case over the years filled the room. In the front row, Margaret Parker sat silently, her hands clasped tightly, her weathered face that of a mother who had waited nearly 3 decades to hear her daughter's name spoken in the name of justice. Across the room, Thomas Renshaw was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his face ashen, his eyes calm but distant. Beside him was his court-appointed defense attorney, David Klein, known for taking on tough cases. At the prosecution's table, Harold Kinney neatly arranged the thick case files, ready to begin arguments. The trial opened with the prosecution's overview. Kinney stood, his voice clear and deliberate. "This is not just a murder case. This is the case of a young woman erased from the world, buried under concrete for nearly 30 years, and finally, through persistent investigation, brought back." He presented the physical evidence to the court: the Marlboro cigarette butt, DNA reports, the map of the body's location, drawn by Renshaw, and Dr. Latham's forensic findings. Witnesses took the stand in turn. The DNA technician confirmed the 99.99% match. Dr. Latham described the skull injury and confirmed the cause of death as a heavy blunt impact, not a minor accident. Photos of the remains and evidence were displayed, the courtroom silent except for the hum of the projector. During the prosecution's argument, Kinney pointed at the defendant. Mr. Renshaw had a choice. He could have called for help, reported it, but instead, he mixed concrete and hid the body. That was not a reflex of fear. It was a deliberate decision. He read from the original confession, where Renshaw admitted to pouring concrete over the body at dawn. The statement echoed in the room like a hammer striking steel. Defense attorney Klein stood up, opening his rebuttal with a measured tone. "My client is not a deliberate murderer. This was a tragic accident between 2 acquaintances. The death occurred in an instant, with no intentional violence. Mr. Renshaw panicked, acted blindly, and lived with remorse for nearly 30 years. He tried to persuade the jury that the act of hiding the body stemmed from fear, not evidence of second-degree murder. But as the prosecution presented photos of the tied ropes, the carefully poured concrete, and the detailed map accurately pinpointing the body's location, his argument began to crumble. Torres was called to the witness stand. She recounted the reinvestigation process, tracking down witnesses, the DNA results, and the confession in the interrogation room. Her voice was calm, objective, without a single unnecessary word. When Kinney asked, from an investigative perspective, "Do you believe Mr. Renshaw acted in panic?" Torres replied, "No, sir. Every detail suggests preparation. He knew exactly what he needed to do to erase the evidence." The press gallery scribbled down every word. On the 3rd day of the trial, the jury was asked to review the entire case file and evidence. The 12 jurors sat silently, each holding a copy of the court transcript. No one spoke during the nearly 3-hour deliberation. Outside, the courthouse hallway was thick with tension. Margaret Parker sat on a wooden bench, clutching a rosary, her eyes closed, lips moving as if in prayer. Torres stood a few steps away, staring at the worn stone floor, thinking of Malone, who never saw this day. In the afternoon, when the court bell rang, everyone returned to the courtroom. The clerk stood and read the verdict aloud. Based on the evidence presented and witness testimonies, the jury unanimously finds the defendant, Thomas Renshaw, guilty. Second-degree murder. The room fell silent for a few seconds before murmurs erupted, mixed with soft sobs from the front row. Kinney bowed his head, closing the file. Renshaw sat motionless, staring into space, his cuffed hands trembling slightly. The judge delivered the sentence immediately. Given the severity of the crime, the prolonged concealment, and the defendant's failure to come forward for nearly 30 years, this court sentences Thomas Renshaw to 25 years in prison at the Wisconsin State Correctional Facility. The sentence begins immediately. The wooden gavel struck, echoing through the room, closing the 4-day trial. As officers led Renshaw through the hallway, he glanced back briefly. No one could tell who his gaze was for. Margaret, the prosecutor, or Torres, only that it was the look of a man finally facing what he had buried under concrete for 3 decades. Outside the courthouse, light snow fell. Reporters crowded the exit, cameras flashing relentlessly. Torres walked quickly, avoiding the throng, clutching her briefcase tightly. She answered no questions. Pausing for a second on the courthouse steps, she took a deep breath. In her mind, a single sentence echoed, Case hash 41880, closed by verdict. After the sentencing, the Milwaukee Police Department began compiling a comprehensive case review for training purposes. The report, titled Case hash 41880, Cold Case Resolution Review, was completed in mid-2009, spanning over 100 pages, detailing the process from the initial 1980 investigation to Thomas Renshaw's conviction. The introduction stated, "The Evelyn Parker case exemplifies the importance of long-term evidence preservation and the value of forensic technology in resolving cold cases." The analysis team divided the case into 2 distinct phases. Initial investigation, 1980, and re-investigation, 2008. The first section highlighted unavoidable limitations of the time. DNA testing didn't exist. Crime scene analysis was rudimentary, and police lacked sufficient legal grounds for a search warrant. Malone, the lead investigator in 1980, was credited for diligently collecting all possible evidence, but was constrained by legal regulations and investigative tools of the era. The report noted, primary weakness, insufficient probable cause for search warrant. No DNA analysis available. Case suspended pending new evidence. The second section focused on 2008, when the cold case unit was established. The turning point was Detective Jamie Torres's review of the Parker file and discovery of intact, properly sealed evidence. The team verified the chain of custody, unbroken over 28 years. This was deemed pivotal, as even a minor lapse in storage could have rendered the Marlboro cigarette butt legally inadmissible for testing. The report further stated, key forensic turning point, DNA analysis successfully extracted from aged biological trace. Match confirmed with suspect Renshaw via medical record sample. It emphasized the collaboration between independent labs, reinforcing the results' reliability. In the operational review, Torres was recognized for applying modern forensic technology alongside traditional investigative methods, ensuring a seamless evidence chain across 2 generations of investigation. The review dedicated a section to Renshaw's confession and the excavation results. Analysis showed the map he drew during interrogation matched the body's location perfectly, direction, distance, and depth. Every detail aligned with forensic conclusions, confirming the confession's high accuracy. The report concluded. Confession accuracy rate, 100% location match. Concealment method consistent with physical evidence. Beyond evaluating investigative competence, the Milwaukee Police Department used the Parker Renshaw case as a teaching example in cold case training across Wisconsin. The document was circulated internally as the Parker Protocol. It outlined key principles derived from the case. 1. All evidence, however small, must be preserved indefinitely if it holds biological value. Periodic reviews of unresolved cases are essential to apply new forensic technologies. 3. When reopening cases, original witness data and the victim's social connections must be reconstructed. 4. Collaboration between investigative and prosecutorial units is critical for success. The report's final section included a brief note about Richard Malone, the original investigator, now retired. Torres wrote in the appendix, "He preserved the most critical element, the intact evidence. Without that diligence, this case would have remained just a name in the archives." When the report was approved, the Evelyn Parker case was officially classified as a case study in Wisconsin's cold case system. On the cover, the final conclusion was printed in bold, a reminder for future investigators: justice may sleep, but evidence never dies. When Thomas Renshaw's sentence was announced, the news spread across Milwaukee within hours. The next morning's papers ran photos of the courthouse with bold headlines. "Justice after 28 years, Evelyn Parker case finally closed." Local radio stations aired special programs recounting details of the 1980 disappearance many thought had been forgotten. Calls from residents flooded the police station, a mix of condolences and shock. They couldn't believe the man who killed the young woman had lived quietly in their city, running a garage, interacting daily with customers, and passing through countless winters as an ordinary citizen. In the old neighborhoods where the Schlitz brewery once operated, retired workers gathered in small coffee shops to discuss the Evelyn case. Many still remembered the brown-haired girl who always smiled, carrying her red canvas bag each morning. "I worked with her for a few months," one told a reporter. "Can't believe all those years, she was right under our feet, and no one knew." The mood was both mournful and heavy with regret. On local online forums, the phrase "justice delayed" appeared frequently, a community's attempt to balance grief with relief. For the Milwaukee Police Department, the case became a symbol of professional faith. The department's chief said at a press conference, "Justice doesn't vanish. It's only temporarily obscured. Our duty is to keep digging through time's dust to find it." He announced the creation of the Evelyn Parker Fund, a special fund supported by police and community donations to preserve old evidence and finance reinvestigations of long unsolved disappearances. The fund, named for Evelyn, served as a reminder of the importance of every piece of evidence and file in the archives. In its first year, the Parker Fund supported the reopening of 3 other unresolved cases in Wisconsin, funding DNA testing and new storage systems. Torres, who led the Parker case, was invited to speak at the fund's launch. She said briefly, "No case is truly closed as long as evidence exists and someone is willing to reopen it." Her voice was low, resolute, and the room fell silent. National media soon picked up the story. CBS's 48 Hours aired a special episode titled "The Woman Beneath the Concrete." It chronicled the entire investigation, from the disappearance to the trial, interviewing Torres, prosecutor Kinney, and several original witnesses. Images of the sealed Schlitz warehouse played to somber music, interspersed with the sound of cold wind over the Menominee River. The host closed with "Justice doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, it speaks for those who no longer can." The case sparked renewed community interest in long unsolved disappearances. Families who had filed reports and lost hope contacted the police, asking if new DNA technology could help. The department established a dedicated cold case hotline. Torres and her team were invited to workshops, sharing reinvestigation processes and proper evidence preservation. The Parker Protocol became an official training manual at the Wisconsin Police Academy and was later adopted into the FBI's National Training Program. Its introduction quoted Torres, "Justice has no age, only people who stop searching." In a small southern Milwaukee neighborhood, where the Parker family once lived, the backyard garden was restored. Margaret, now frail, planted a bed of poppies beside a small plaque bearing her daughter's name. She avoided cameras, sending only a short letter to the police. "Thank you for bringing my daughter back. I know, though late. She's been called by her true name." The letter was framed and hung in the Milwaukee Police Department's hallway, next to a photo of Evie Parker, the young woman with brown hair, bright eyes, and a gentle smile. For Torres, closing the case was not just a professional triumph, but proof of time and memory's power. In a final interview, when asked what she thought of the case after everything, she replied, "I think justice doesn't always come on time, but it will come as long as someone keeps searching." In Milwaukee, a city accustomed to winter's silence and the cold winds from Lake Michigan, her words seemed to linger, soft but enduring, like the echo of a promise kept after nearly 30 years of waiting. The Evelyn Parker case is not just a story of solving a cold case, but a powerful reminder of the value of persistence, faith in justice, and the role of science in modern American life. In a country with tens of thousands of missing persons cases reported annually, from Milwaukee to cities like Chicago or Houston, this case reflects the belief that no crime can remain buried forever, as long as people keep searching for the truth. When Detective Jamie Torres rediscovered the forgotten Marlboro cigarette butt in the evidence locker after 28 years, she proved that justice sometimes comes not through luck, but through persistence and respect for the smallest details. Detective Malone's careful preservation of evidence in 1980, despite lacking the technology to analyze it, laid the foundation for the truth to emerge decades later. In today's American society, this lesson is vital. Every small action in the present can have a profound impact on the future. On a personal level, Evelyn's story reminds us of the importance of speaking up. Silence or ignoring something unusual can prolong tragedy. On a community level, it's a call to invest in forensic science, storage systems, and data technology to ensure no missing persons case is forgotten due to lack of tools. Ultimately, the Parker case shows that justice in America, though sometimes delayed, remains an unbreakable promise, as long as there are people like Malone, Torres, and countless investigators quietly keeping that light alive for society. If you believe justice can be delayed, but never lost, please subscribe to the channel to follow more cases solved after decades of silence. Thank you for joining us in Evelyn Parker's story, and we'll see you in the next video, where every truth has its day to be found.